Anyway, back to this. Lesson 5, remember professional ethics.
Hello, I'm Timothy Snyder. What I'm up to is recording a series of informal talks, very brief talks about the 20 lessons on tyranny. The reason I'm doing this is that it's been almost 5 years since I thought up the lessons on tyranny, and a good deal has happened in between. I'm speaking to you now in the summer of 2021. I'm also doing this because
I don't think this guy debated destiny. No.
I have updated the text, not the lessons, but the text of the book for a graphic edition, which is appearing in October of 2021. So working together with the wonderful Nora Krug on the illustrated edition.
I also find it very forward facing that he's listing out the year, because he's essentially acknowledging that people in the future are going to watch this video, and I like that. I like that.
Has got me thinking about the lessons again, what they had to tell us about the last 5 years, what they might have to tell us about the years to come. So this is number 5 in what's going to be a series of 20. Lesson number 5 of On Tyranny is remember professional ethics. I'm going to read the lesson.
Yeah, Mask of Anarchy. We should reach out to people in arts, streamers, actors, painters, writers, VTubers, sculptors, and musicians, etc. I agree. Also, folks in the community on our Discord, we actually have specific channels. If you have your kind of songs of resistance or your art of resistance, the places where you can post that. And I'd love to see more submissions from you guys. I think it's all great. I do voice acting. What you need? You do voice acting. I do voice acting. Time for us to have a professional conflict. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Lesson, then offer a few reflections. When political leaders set a negative example, professional commitments to just practice become more important. It is hard to subvert a rule of law state without lawyers, or to hold show trials without judges. Authoritarians need obedient civil servants, and concentration camp directors seek businessmen interested in cheap labor. The first thing I want to say is that, as in all the other...
I do have to say that last sentence is chilling as hell, because you can actually see the stock prices leaping at Donald Trump's discussion of building holding camps. So let's be real, concentration camps for undocumented immigrants. I think you and Dead Domain should do a segment doing your Alex Jones impersonations. I think me and Dead Domain should do a segment, period. We were supposed to collaborate on Election Day, but that day got a lot less fun as it went along.
Other cases, I'm only reading the lesson here. I'm not giving the historical examples that back it up. But for this lesson in particular, I think it's probably worth stressing that these are not theoretical examples. It's literally true that, for example, in the case of Nazi Germany...
Which direction did the stock market leap? Oh, sorry, if I wasn't clear, private prison companies had their stocks go way up because Donald Trump won the election, and because they're all going to now enter a bidding war to be the people who run and manage those concentration camps, and then get to sell out the labor of undocumented immigrants for cheap, while still taking all of the money for themselves.
The concentration camps needed and relied upon.
Would the mass deportation be considered a genocide? No, it'd be considered an ethnic cleansing campaign. I don't think it'd be considered a genocide, but ethnic cleansing, absolutely. The question, and this is if conversations about the cost of doing deportations get heated, and this is if the Trump administration is truly interested in rounding up tens of millions of undocumented immigrants, then the question becomes cost and cost effectiveness, at which point, then you're talking about death camps, and that would become a genocide. Does that make sense? Yeah, exactly. It becomes a genocide when they decide to stop spending money to feed them, to transport them outside of the camps, etc. Yeah, essentially.
Willing businessmen. It is literally the case that show trials, as for example in the Soviet Union, required judges and prosecutors and other legal professionals. Uh, and these extreme cases of how things, from our point of view, might go wrong are instructive because
How are there private prison companies when all prisons are state or federal? Well, all prisons aren't state or federal. There are lots of prisons that are private prisons. They are privately run, and then the state or the federal government gives contracts to those prisons to house prisoners. It's the privatization of the prison system.
they tell us that professional groups
Also, we've had those for like 50 years, at
are a
least.
very important part of, let's call it, civil society. So in every attempt to consolidate power, what you find is that power is going to try to limit the number of opponents. It's going to try to simplify the regime itself. It's going to try to make sure there are few strong institutions between it and people, and it's going to try to leave people as individuated, as isolated, as alienated as possible. This is why this
And what he's describing here is why it's so important for you to find community, because community is what's going to keep you safe when the true isolation descends.
thing called civil society is so important, because civil society is that set of organizations which allows people to connect among themselves based upon the things that they do or think or believe. In the case of the professions, people are coming together on the basis of what they do, but, and this is the point of this lesson, hopefully also on the basis of what they believe. The question of whether lawyers or judges or military officers.
Oh yeah, Quiet Kitsune. The United States has had private prisons since like the 1800s. There have been private prisons in the United States for almost 200 years.
Officers are just people with titles and uniforms, or whether they have some kind of, let's call it, guild loyalty. They have some set of values which is not just a watered down version of whatever the regime is telling them, is a crucial question for the future of any democracy and of our democracy.
I also think that he's bringing up a really good point here in that professional ethics play a key role in labor organizing. Um, in order to have the organization and the trustworthiness to form, a labor union and resist through the union, you need to have those professional ethics. You need to have people who can be relied upon to, do their job in a way. So, like, having people who are unwilling to compromise in the face of what is going to be an immense amount of pressure from their, hierarchical superiors. That's pretty important. It is an important form of resistance that, builds upon kind of institutional resistance.
We certainly saw that during the course of the last few years. It mattered a great
Oh,
deal.
sorry. Did I say Quiet Kitsune? I'm sorry, Kitsune Cavalier. I get you two mixed up in my brain. I usually don't say it out loud, though.
Whether lawyers would go along with lawsuits which they understood to be farcical and false, having to do with Mr. Trump's claims of voter fraud. It mattered just as much that the highest ranking officers of our armed forces were not willing to go along.
Polyaz's Cracker think that there's too much credit given to Trump. Well, Trump is gonna Trump is only there to enrich himself. He's there to rape and pillage the wealth of the country, literally, and I think most of the people he's bringing in are similarly positioned to do that. That is his only goal. He's not playing this 4D chess. I don't think he has a secret goal to, like, kill all of X group or anything. It's purely make as much money as possible, which doesn't necessarily, like, preclude him from doing more terrible things. It just means that those aren't, like, really on his priority list. He wants the attention and he wants the money, and that's basically all he really cares about.
Along with a coup attempt in the summer of 2020. So much has happened that it's easy to forget even things which seem totally shocking.
Well, no, see, the thing to remember, Live for Life, is that cruelty is the point with right-wingers when that cruelty is owning the libs. That's the point. The point is to own the libs. It's why all of these think pieces right now are being written about Blue Sky by conservative institutions, because essentially they're upset because they have difficulty owning the libs if the libs are elsewhere. So the cruelty is merely the vehicle for dunking on the libs. And I don't think that a massive genocide campaign is really the thing that they're aiming to do. They're aiming to make money. Owning the libs is just a convenient vehicle to that end. And we're going to talk about it more later, but Nancy Mace doing this anti-trans bullshit in Congress is just doing it to own the libs. It's not because she has a deeply held conviction that trans people aren't the gender they say they are. It's not because she hates trans people. At the end of the day, she's indifferent to trans people, and she's cynically willing to use trans people as a wedge to solidify her own power and her own ability to make more money. Like, that is fundamentally what it's all about, right? Like, you can find tweets that she made or statements that she made, like, a couple of years ago in support of, like, trans people, in support of, like, LGBTQ people. Like, these are not sincerely held positions, but she is absolutely willing to throw trans people under the bus the second she feels it will get her more money, power, fame, etc. And a lot of Republicans are like that. And so all I'm saying here is that that's the priority for most of the Republicans that are in power right now and who are ascendant right now. Their priority is money and fame and power. And predominantly money. Let's be clear here. So that's what I'm saying. That's where their priority is. It's not in this deeply held personal conviction that, they need to kill all trans people or they need to kill all undocumented immigrants. That's not where any of their policies are coming from, which is an important point to make. That being said, they are indifferent to those outcomes. So we need to make sure to resist along those axes to make sure that those things don't happen, Hope that makes sense.
At the time, but even though they were superseded by still more.
I think for some of them, hate is a motivating factor, but I gotta be honest with you guys, a lot of Republicans behind closed doors to trans people will walk up and shake your hand and be like, "Hey, I don't actually hate you, I'm just doing politics. To them, it's a game. It's a fucking game." Zoe Zephyr in Montana, a state dominated by Republicans, talks about this frequently, how her Republican colleagues will approach her after voting is done and when cameras are off to apologize and to, essentially seek absolution because they don't really hate trans people. They're just willing to, throw trans people under the bus. It does not feel like that at all. It doesn't feel like that because we're on the receiving end of their hatred. And I'm not trying to say it's not abhorrent, guys. Like, What are you doing, guys? How are you misunderstanding my point this badly? How have you manipulated the words that I have said to arrive at the conclusion that I'm saying, "Oh, well, that's not bad." Obviously, it's fucking bad, guys. Jesus Christ. But what I'm trying to say is that there is a difference between approaching things from that perspective and approaching things from the perspective of, I want to kill all of them. Or, finally a chance to establish that trans people are subhuman. Like, no. That's not where the vast majority of these people are coming from. Some of them, absolutely. The vast majority, though, it's just a game to them that they have no skin in. So it's not something that they feel actually affects them. It affects some other person, some hypothetical. And so all I'm saying is that one of the reasons I have adjusted my expectations a bit is because resistance to these ideas can be effective because they are not ideologically, like, married to these positions on personal levels. You know? They are not, they've embraced, they've embraced, the idea of, like, yeah, well, let's deport all of them, et cetera, et cetera. But keep in mind, these are people who just, like, 2-3 years ago were talking about how, they would never vote for Trump, and now they're all kissing the ring. These are spineless cretins, which works in our favor. Because the more we push back on certain abuses of the system that they would otherwise implement, the harder it becomes to implement them, and the less political capital they want to expend to actually do those things. Their voter base has a different, more sinister view. Honestly, their voter base, I think a lot of the voter base is just motivated economically. I don't think most of the voter base cares about trans people. Gotta be honest with you guys. A lot of them may be transphobic, but it's largely due to marketing campaigns against trans people. Jack, this is all true until Gen Z men start getting appointed to government positions. Then we're gonna have a national woman ban or something. Nah, look, we can soberly assess the situation without, like, that level of hyperbole.
More shocking events and another coup attempt. The summer of 2020 was a moment we should remember because it's a moment when the leaders of our military.
I don't think it's economic anxiety when they want to kamikaze the economy. Look, again, you have to reckon with the fact that Dems lost the working class for the first time in modern electoral history. And that's not because of, like, middle class Republican, upper middle class Republican economic anxiety, but it is because, wages remain stagnant under Biden. The COVID support went away, and, like, working class families had their wages stagnant while inflation ripped them apart and rising rents ripped them apart. And so they feel less and less like the economy is going well. And, well, when you examine the two political entities that approached them during the election cycle, again, most working class people don't know what a fucking tariff is. But when they hear Donald Trump say it, they're like, oh, well, he's saying he's going to cut all of my taxes, and then a country that I don't like is going to pay for it. That sounds pretty good. Doesn't matter that he's lying. They're not going to check if he's lying or not. They don't got the time, they don't got the energy, they don't got the inclination, okay? On the other hand, you have Kamala Harris who's saying, I am going to be Joe Biden. And a lot of these people don't feel like Joe Biden did much for them because they might have gotten that 5% raise to their wages, but that raise to their wages is dwarfed by the inflation and dwarfed by the amount of rent that goes up. So ultimately, they feel more like they're struggling. And again, we're talking about working class voters. They don't have the time and energy. A lot of them are working 2 jobs. A lot of them are struggling to get by, and the Democratic Party didn't really offer them a whole lot, aside from waving a chart in their face and say, like, oh, look how much better it is under Biden. And yeah, the numbers on the chart go up, but to working class folks, that doesn't really feel like an improvement. They had more money when COVID support and the COVID stimulus was going through. A lot of these people voted not specifically to kamikaze the economy. They voted because they thought their taxes would go down, and that would encourage business in the United States. And as far as they understand, those are both good things that would help them out. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris had plans drafted for her by the CFO of Uber, her brother-in-law, and fundamentally, while a lot of her policies probably would have helped a lot of working class people, she wasn't able to put it into populist language that working class people understand. She wasn't able to say, I'm going to get you a $20 minimum wage. She wasn't able to say, I'm going to get rid of your medical debt. She wasn't able to say that she's going to implement Medicare for all. She wasn't able to say simple, approachable economic positions that are popular among all people in America when you frame them correctly. And that was a fundamental problem. And this is the thing I need to keep banging the bell about. We have to reckon with the fact that Kamala Harris lost working class voters. We have to reckon with that. It's not enough to say, well, working class voters are stupid. Working class voters are our allies, guys. In any kind of organization, in any kind of resistance, in any kind of future that is worth having, we need to win them back. And you win them back with the one issue that cuts through all of the other bullshit and misinformation. And that is with economic messaging. She lost white working class voters. She also lost, by large margin, she didn't lose, but Donald Trump made large wins and inroads in communities that historically vote Democrat, largely along economic lines. The other ones seem to understand what was at stake. Some. But you have to account for why a lot of these minority groups went for a guy who is specifically campaigning against minority groups. It's because the economic messaging, as shitty as it was from Donald Trump, was better than the economic messaging of Kamala Harris. Sorry, telling people who are struggling that the economy is going great doesn't get them to come out and vote for you. Well, but that's the thing, my rear end. They don't understand. They're working 12-hour days at Jamba Juice. They're doing like 12 hours a day, 2 jobs, in order to make ends meet for their family. They aren't going home and Googling what a tariff is. They aren't going home and Googling anything. They're just absorbing it from the political ecosystem. And that's why you need the simple package of messaging to sell your economic ideas. And she didn't have that. She wasn't willing to give voters that. And again, largely because after she got out of the primary, after she was anointed as the chosen one, she shifted her messaging in a way that wasn't effective. They shifted away from confrontational weirdness. They shifted away from working class policy proposals and messaging. They shifted away from all of that because they wanted that big money donation cycle to happen. And that is a big problem. Yeah, exactly, Bastion. I think that's a really great point. You cannot just be correct. Being correct is not enough. Having the correct opinion, the correct politics is not enough. You need to actually be able to package that for people. And that's true, by the way, of any kind of organizing effort. That's true of any kind of social interaction. That's true of any kind of group activity. Also, Brutus Magnuson, thank you for the $5 super chat. Don't anyone here think they're above absorbing messages? Marketing works for a reason. Exactly. So, yeah, you need a good narrative. And that narrative was established at the beginning of Kamala's campaign, thrown out the window halfway through.
Military made it clear that they weren't going along. Why? On the basis of some set of ethics, which is not the same thing as what the leader tells you at a given moment. It goes without saying that we could also have had a coup d'etat, which was successful in late 2020, early 2021, had the military been willing to go along, or had other institutions been willing to go along. That the institutions themselves didn't rescue us, they never do. One of the things which kept the United States recognizably a democracy during that period was the decisions that people made on the basis of codes of ethics, which have to do with their professions. And in those weeks, that could be the military. It could also have been lawyers. Let me now look just for a moment into the future. Do businessmen have professional ethics in the sense that I'm talking about? I'm not going to answer this question. I'm asking it. It seems to me be a historically open question. If I look back to the past, I can note a couple phenomena which are very much of interest. Number one, in the important, paradigmatic, unforgettable example of regime change, which is the rise of Nazi Germany, businesses played a certain very important part. It was not that all the businessmen were Nazis, by no means. It was that big business was opposed to labor unions and opposed to democracy, and thought that the world would be easier to handle without labor unions and democracy, right? That is part of Hitler's rise to power. A second thing which is worth knowing about history, more recent history, the history of the last few decades, has to do with coup attempts. Coup attempts are much more likely to succeed if important businessmen are on the side of the people who are carrying out the coup attempts. The United States in 2020 and 2021 is a recent example of the opposite, that coup attempts are more likely to fail when business leaders are against them. So, what business ethics means in politics is a question I'm only opening. I'm not trying to answer it. I'm pointing out, though, that there's clear causal force in what business leaders decide to do, and where there's causal force, there's also responsibility. If in the past the success or failure of coup attempts, or indeed the survival or the failure of democracy, has depended upon the choices of business leaders, I think we can confidently expect that it will in the future as well.
Yeah, this is one of the big problems, guys, and this is why there's never been a better time to unionize than right now. If you are at all capable of unionizing your workplace, now's the time to do it, because those unions are going to be an axis of resistance in our society. And they are also going to be something that will perhaps be able to form some kind of understanding with the ownership class. They are a communication tool to kind of protect negotiations, to kind of bend these business people to perhaps a better outcome. Perhaps.
In the US in 2021 and years to come, this is particularly relevant to the issue of voting. A key issue in the United States now is whether we will have the principle of one person, one vote, or not. That issue will be talked around. It will be approached indirectly. People will talk about fraud, or they'll talk about uncertainty, or they'll talk about that their constituents have concerns. But what is happening is the disenfranchisement of a very large number of Americans, and the attempt to establish the principle through overwhelming practice and repetition that we are not really a country where one person, one vote prevails. Business has a lot to say about that. Whether, so to put the matter,
Also, just to be very clear here, one of the things that I think is going to radicalize a lot of the working class is if Donald Trump actually does push through his tariffs. Because basically, the entire country is going to immediately feel that. And I mean, like, it is going to get reported over and over again, and people are going to get really pissed off really fast. So this is one thing to keep an eye out when you see your Republican friends and relatives talking about this. I really do want to kind of emphasize here: do your best to have the most constructive I told you so conversation. Like, don't take it as an opportunity to like rub it in anybody's faces, because honestly, a lot of people genuinely had no idea. A lot of people did not know what a tariff is or would do, and did not understand what a stupid idea it was. And they're going to need someone to kind of explain and walk them through why tariffs are essentially a tax on them, and why suddenly the guy that they voted for to make their eggs less expensive has made their eggs, 20, 30, 40% more expensive. Talk to them about the power of their vote. Talk to them about the lessons you've learned about political organizing and resistance organizing. Talk to them about unionizing. Talk to them, radicalize them into resistance. Because this unironically is going to be your big opportunity to do that. This is going to be your opportunity to take that extra responsibility that you might not feel like you owe society, but will help. It'll be doing your part. With all due respect, Rob Law, again, we've gone down that road, and when people put knowledge tests to voting, who winds up suffering? The people that the test makers dislike. For various racial, ethnic, gender, sexuality reasons. The thing to do here is not to say, oh, all these dumb working class people shouldn't be able to vote while you get high on your own farts. No, the solution here is to recognize that the reason most people don't have an awareness, most working class people don't have an awareness of what a tariff is or would do, is specifically because they are too busy and too exhausted constantly to be able to look that up. If you are in my chat, you are in an elite position of knowing way more about politics than your average person in America. That doesn't make you better than them. What it does is make you more informed, and you can make the decision to then inform others. That's one thing you can do. And it's kind of shocking to see you say that you would have political capital wasted on denying people their fundamental right to vote in a democracy versus using that political capital to inform people or to better the working conditions of people so they actually have time to give a shit. The reason the working class tends to be underinformed is not because they hate being informed. It's because they get worked to the point of falling asleep on the job. Have you ever tried working, like, I mean, if any of you in the audience have worked a job as a parent, you know exactly how exhausted you can be coming home at the end of the day to take care of a kid. And if you've ever done that, now imagine you have to work 2 jobs while taking care of that kid. You think people who do that have the luxury of being able to, like, look at the political messaging and be like, ah, yes, I must now do in-depth research that will take me several hours? No, they're not going to do that. This isn't a democracy? Then why the fuck are you here? Jesus, if you don't believe in resistance in order to like better our democracy, if you only are here to shit on any kind of effort to improve things, you should leave. I want you to post one constructive thing in chat, because it will be the first constructive thing I've seen you post. My challenge to you, and I do mean it this time, if you post something that is doomer posting one more time today, you're going to be banned. So the next thing you post in my chat should be constructive and a way to better our current terrible circumstances. Moving right along. Anyway, this is going to be a point at which you can approach people and attempt to radicalize them to a resistance position. There we go.
As clear as I can, whether a business ethic develops in the 21st century, which says we prefer to inhabit a country where one person, one vote is real and not just a declaration. Whether or not business leaders can stick to that position, can adopt it, and can stick to it, I think will have a great deal to do with what happens in the years to come. So the original lesson is remember professional ethics. And in the lesson, I talked about judges and lawyers and civil servants. But at the very end, I also mentioned businessmen. And I think in the years to come, what businessmen, businesswomen, business leaders, business people choose to do, whether there's a business ethic, which has something to do with a political system, with a normative affirmation of just the basic idea that everybody has the right to vote, that could well.
My mom is very conservative and she worked hard on the factory floor, breaking her body so we could live comfortably. She did not have time to do in-depth research. Lol, how could she? Exactly! Exactly! And there are people all over this country working multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. Well, who also then do the additional unpaid job of raising a kid. They still deserve to vote. The issue is not them, it is the messaging to them.
Will turn out to be decisive in American politics. So remember professional ethics. Thank you.
Yeah, look, guys, some people are just going to be here. Some people are just going to be here to doomer post specifically to get under your skin, okay, guys? Some people are going to be doomer posting to make you doomer with them, and honestly, they're just going to be here to rustle your jimmies. They're just going to be here to dissuade you from taking action, to make it seem like complicity is the easiest path forward to survival. They're just here to demotivate you. They are effectively agitators for the fascists that are coming into power. Don't let them get under your skin, and beware of people who are black-pilled, because not all of them are genuinely coming from that position. A lot of them are essentially operatives who are trying to lull you into complacency and inaction. Don't be weak.
Hello, I'm Timothy Snyder. I'm a historian. I wrote on tyranny and some other books. I've written a couple of other books since I wrote on tyranny, which is one of the reasons why it's interesting for me to return.
I'm only here to Gunner post. Honestly, more constructive. At least someone's getting something out of that.
Turn to the lessons. I'm returning them now, 5 years after I wrote them. Now in
who's doomer posting? Someone who's banned.
In 2021, for a very specific reason. We've all gone through a lot together these last few years, and I've updated the text of On Tyranny to
reflect. Oh, Archangel, fancy Felipe Flape is joshing around.
Reflect that, not the lessons, they're the same, just the text. And I'm very happy to say that this updated text will be illustrated by Nora Krug in a very special.
At least some of us aren't, though. We've just lost hope. Well, now's the time to regain that and pull yourself up. Because we need you. Now's not the time.
New edition of the book, which is appearing in October 2021. So working together with Nora on this project has got me thinking again about the lessons. And what I've decided to do is talk through each of them one at a time and say a few words about what's happened to us recently, what might be happening to us now, how to think about the future. So today we're on lesson number 6. Lesson number 6 of On Tyranny is be wary of paramilitaries.
Honestly, just really good advice generally. I feel like, yeah, you probably should be wary of anyone who's in a paramilitary group.
When the men with guns who have always claimed to be against the system start wearing uniforms and marching with torches and pictures of a leader, the end is nigh. When the pro-leader paramilitary and the official police and military intermingle, the end has come. I remember when On Tyranny came out, one of the dominant reactions, I think even among people who liked the book, was to say, no, this is too extreme. You know, the institutions are going to save us. Americans are exceptional. It can't happen here, all that sort of thing. 4 or 5 years on, I think that reaction has dampened. And I'm very glad that I wrote the book when I did. To repeat a point I made in talking about lesson number 1, which is don't obey in advance, timing is very important. When you think something is wrong, when you feel something is wrong, it's best to act at that moment when you have that conviction, because if you don't act at that moment, then you're going along. If I hadn't written the book when I wrote the book, I would have felt like I was going along. So looking back, I'm really glad I did. This particular lesson about paramilitaries has unfortunately proven to be all too topical. I'm going to repeat, the basic historical grounding of this lesson before I talk about the present. The basic historical grounding of this lesson is that some of the worst repression in history arises from a mixture, a molding together of paramilitaries who are not part of the state with state power. So when we think about Nazi Germany and the SS, we might think, well, the SS, they were soldiers, they were policemen. We're thinking, no, they were not. The SS were a paramilitary.
Yeah, the brown shirts became the SS. And this is one of the things to kind of keep an eye on, especially like this. I think this is a very useful barometer for when shit is genuinely about to hit the fan. What he's talking about would be like paramilitary militia groups like the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers, both groups which participated in January 6th. What he's basically saying is, Patriot Front, another one. What he's basically saying is if you see those groups start to be instilled with the same kind of authority and powers as law enforcement, we're entering end state fascism. We're entering like genuinely Nazi-esque times. We are not there yet. There has been historically a problem in the US with white supremacy in law enforcement, gang activity in law enforcement, crossover between law enforcement and paramilitary groups. But honestly, it can get a lot worse. And what he's talking about is the a lot worse version.
SS was an illegal, violent group that was associated with the Nazi Party, but it wasn't part of the state. It wasn't part of the state. It was a paramilitary. And it was the merger of this racist paramilitary with state power, which was one of the most dangerous things about the Nazi period. I mention that because we obviously, we're not in exactly the same place, of course, but we obviously have a tendency to overlook this particular path to unfreedom. the American tradition is to look only at the government and to ask what the government is doing wrong and say maybe there should only be less government. But of course, what we do matters a lot as well. And if we dress up in uniforms and carry torches and carry out acts of violence and try to take the monopoly of violence away from the government, we're doing something very particular which has a history. And of course, some of the people who do that know that history. So these things that I mentioned in this text, a lot of them happened. The marching with torches.
Yeah, by the way, when we talk about the need for leftists to, if you are capable, if you are willing to get armed and to, practice your marksmanship, what we're talking about is in preparation for conflict with paramilitary groups like the Brown Shirts, the group that became the SS, the informalized paramilitaries who may or may not attempt to gain legitimacy from the state. There is a period there between illegitimacy and legitimacy where they are going to be lashing out, and you are totally and completely within your rights to defend yourself and your loved ones. This is one of the reasons why I tentatively advise people to, now would be the time, start learning how to do that.
We certainly had Charlottesville, for example. The paramilitaries, we certainly had an attempted coup d'etat with the support, participation of paramilitaries. That we also had in January 2021. And we need to remember that there are lots of failed coups, right? I'm not going to say that what happened in January 2021 is exactly like the beer hall putsch that Hitler and the Nazis carried out roughly a century before. I am just going to say that in general, a failed coup is what happens before a successful coup. A failed coup is practice for a successful coup. It's hard to get a coup right the first time. Once you've had a coup attempt in your country, which we have had, you can't look away from the basic reality that other coup attempts are very likely coming down the road.
Or, unfortunately, yeah. Update, it was our version of the beer hall push. Yeah, kind of.
So when I say be wary of paramilitaries in 2021, I mean a couple of things. I mean the same thing I meant 4.5 years ago. I mean, watch out for them, notice them, understand their historical importance. But I also mean, and the leaders of our police forces and armed forces, I think, to a large degree understand this, I also mean you have...
So January 6th was practice? No, the same way the beer hall push was not practice. It was a sincere attempt to seize power in the United States, but it failed. But that didn't end the movement, That didn't end, the Nazi movement. It didn't end the MAGA movement.
You have to be wary of them within the ranks of the institutions where people bear arms. The fact that we had a coup attempt, in very strange circumstances, by the way, means that the armed forces and the police and all the other institutions where people bear arms have to be investigating themselves. They have to be wary in that sense. How many of our people took part in this? How many of our people supported this? But we also need to be wary in a broader sense. We have to have knowledge of what actually happened. In a number of these little videos, I'm going to just repeat that there was a coup attempt on the 6th of January, 2021. I was one of the very few people to predict correctly that such a thing was going to happen. I predicted on the basis of the same kinds of readings and thought about history that led me to write on tyranny in the first place. Now that it has happened, we need not to look away from it. We need to do the opposite. We need to make sure that as a government, as citizens, and as civil society organizations, we carry out investigations of this thing so that we can understand how it was possible from the perspective of the paramilitaries, from the perspective of other people who took part, from the perspective of the forces that did not guard the Capitol, from the perspective...
Yeah, so what he's talking about here is the need for journalism. The need for, introspection and figure out how things happened. And frankly, we're going to need that more than ever with the Trump administration, because there's going to be a lot that happens, and there's going to be a lot, like a concerted effort to downplay it, to scrape it under the rug, to, otherwise, make stories that are genuinely huge deals and have sweeping implications disappear. So please support outlets that are actually doing good journalism. Support things like Democracy Now! Support ProPublica. We talked about a story that ProPublica did about insurance companies earlier today, and how United Health actually decides who basically can live and who can die, and what their internal process for making those decisions is. And they even developed a tool that can get you an answer for why you were denied healthcare coverage, or why your healthcare claim was denied, regardless of what company you're working with. So places like ProPublica that actually do investigative journalism. There's another story that I want to talk about that's coming up maybe today, maybe tomorrow, about how ProPublica found that essentially a bunch of private schools that were founded on the premise of, keeping racial segregation going after the Civil Rights Act passed, are still receiving millions upon millions of taxpayer dollars to be whites-only schools, effectively, in the South, because of school choice programs, because of these school voucher programs that Republicans have been pushing, because that is a key component. It's not just about funneling taxpayer money into religious organizations and religious institutions. It is about upholding that culture of white supremacy, because that's what private schools can do. And we need more reporting on stuff like this. This is the kind of stuff that, like, genuinely informs people and can move the needle. And the more that we have journalists doing the hard work on the ground, and keep in mind, journalism is like a dying profession. The only people who make good money doing journalism are people who have completely sold out to mainstream media and are now making, I think like Rachel Maddow took a $5 million pay cut and she's still making $20 million a year. Like, people on mainstream TV make a ton of money, but they're not doing the journalism. And frankly, places like the New York Times, some of them are doing journalism, but most of it these days is like shitty op-eds, where like 1/10 of them have a good point and the other 9 out of 10 are just conservative plants. So, like, the people doing the journalism are not the folks in mainstream media. They are the folks from ProPublica, Media Matters, from a lot of these organizations that are kind of tangential to mainstream media, that haven't been bought out by these venture capitalist ghouls. So, anyway. Oh yeah, no, excellent story, my rear end, about how the potato cartel, there are only 3 companies in America that control the potato supply, and they all conspired to raise their prices to effectively the same, and now they're being sued and called out for it. But it caused like the price of all potato products to skyrocket. Again, this is the kind of stuff that needs more reporting on. Yeah, Aaron Reed, the Majority Report. These places have really good political acumen. And, they are good at reporting. They're good at what they do. They're good at aggregating that information. But let's continue. Sorry.
Perspective of the Capitol policemen who were present, we have to be able to understand how something like this happened. It's now in 2021 that we have to be laying down the documents, laying down the sources for ourselves and for future Americans. Because if we can't look hard at this, if we can't figure out this, then we're basically inviting the next one. So lesson 6 was be wary of paramilitaries. Thank you.
True. Also, chat, this will, I guess, have to be a multi-part endeavor, because we're not even halfway through, and I only have like 45 minutes left to stream with you guys. But to that end, real quick, we're taking another little break. please hit the follow button on Twitch if you are enjoying the show. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you have gotten anything useful out of today's program. And please consider dropping those subs and donos, chat, if you are getting anything valuable out of this. And of course, if you are able, because this show is only made possible thanks to viewers like you. I could not do it without you guys. I do not make enough ad revenue because I talk about sensitive political topics to actually support the channel. So you guys are what makes this show possible. I literally couldn't do it without you guys. And also, yeah, consider sharing the stream around. You know, do the things. Consider doing those things. If we do make it to 30 subs, my partner and I will play Dream Daddy tonight in our onesies. We've already committed to playing Dream Daddy, thanks to generous viewers like you. But we will do it in onesies if you make it up to 30 subs. Good to see you. Hey, Media Breakdown. How we doing? Yeah, the return of Manatee Jack. Oh, wooga! See ya, Mod Hail. Get good sleep time, I think. I think that's what you're going to do, unless you're doing something else that would result in unconsciousness. But let's see. How are we doing? How are we doing on likes? How are we doing on likes? Let's see here. Well, there's a solid 223 of you watching on YouTube right now. We have 149 likes. My challenge to you is to hit 200 likes by the end of the stream. I think you might be able to do it. You motivated go-getters, you. I miss the carefree days where we could just watch Tuttle Twins and not fear for the future. Oh boy, do I have surprises for you later this week. Also, folks, if you're the spiteful type, keep Dennis Prager in your prayers. He took a deep fall and is apparently doing poorly in the hospital. And, you know, I hope that the Lord works in mysterious ways. Anyway, hello, non-binary. No Justice, thank you so much for the YouTube raid. Welcome, raiders. Hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Let's do this. Can we pray for that to persist? You know, you and your prayers, that's your business. I'm just saying, you know, something to be aware of. The end of PragerU? Oh no, PragerU is gonna survive him, unfortunately. All right, folks, let's dive in. We are continuing our journey through On Tyranny. Here we go. Let's get as many of these segments in as we can. Be reflective if you must be armed.
I'm Timothy Snyder, and
honestly, good advice after the last segment.
I'm doing a little video series now, probably going to be called Timothy Snyder Speaks about On Tyranny. I'm returning to the little tradition from 3.5 years ago or so, when I gave short political videos, which people still seem to be watching. And I'm returning to it for a particular reason, which is that it's been a number of years since I wrote the lessons of On Tyranny. I've written a couple of books since then, and an updated text of On Tyranny is going to appear as an illustrated book, as a graphic book in October of 2021. So I've been working on this together with Nora Krug, the wonderful illustrator. And so I thought it would be a good occasion for me to return to the lessons and to say something about the last 5 years or so and the years to come. I'm going through this lesson by lesson. Today is lesson number 7, which is be reflective if you must be armed. If you carry a weapon in public service, may God bless you and keep you. But know that evils of the past involve policemen and soldiers finding themselves one day doing irregular things. Be ready to say no. I'm not going to say much about this lesson because it comes close to being a pure moral call it comes close to being a simple appeal. There are people who bear arms in our public life. There are people who represent our government and our laws by bearing arms. And this lesson is a very simple appeal. I'm going to say one word about where it comes from, and I'm going to say one word about the future. This is going to be a short one, though. Where it comes from is our misunderstanding of the Nazis. We like to talk about the Nazis as though the Nazis were a set of bad people who we can then just kind of separate from the rest of us, the rest of the Germans, the rest of the world. The Nazis somehow mysteriously appeared in 1933, mysteriously disappeared in 1945. But the Nazis, that evocation of that phrase doesn't explain how nearly 6 million Jews were murdered. It doesn't explain how nearly 3 million Soviet prisoners of war were starved to death. It doesn't explain mass atrocity, talking about the Nazis, thinking of bad people. The German police, and I mean just the regular police, the order police, the people who would ordinarily be patrolling the streets and who went back to patrolling the streets of Germany after they'd done awful things in the East. The German police took part in every major massacre of the Holocaust, every one beyond a certain size. The German armed forces, despite the legends about them, also took part in the Holocaust and were the agent of starving millions of people
absolutely.
to death. We prefer not to see those institutions too closely, because if we did, we'd have to ask about institutions, which is what this lesson is about. It's reminding people in the armed forces, it's reminding policemen and others who bear arms that this is the history. This is where you can end up. You can end up in a terrible place, and awareness of the history can help you think about the point.
I need him to make that point again to me.
We prefer not to see those institutions too closely, because if we did, we'd have to ask about.
Media Breakdown, thank you for the $10
Gregor
super chat.
Jack and partner living best American life. Wearing onesies, eating shimps, playing daddy of the dreams, make the YouTube funny haha for glory of American empire. More like Prager who.
You know, I needed that. Thank you, Grigor, Niet Russian, my no strings attached supporter. Thank you so much. I'll add that to the list real quick. There we go. We are now 22 subs away. Let's go.
About institutions, which is what
Eating
this lesson
shimps
is about. It's reminding people in the armed forces, it's reminding policemen and others who bear arms that this is the history. This is where you can end up. You can end up in a terrible place, and awareness of the history can help you think about the point where you might say no. I want to close by saying perhaps something unexpected about the future. It's not enough for me or you to say to the police, to the armed forces, be reflective. Of course, they should be. That's their duty. And as I said in the earlier lesson about professional ethics, these collectivities, these groups have to develop an ethic which goes beyond just what power is asking them to do. But
do I really think it's going to get this bad? There's a possibility that it gets this bad. But I think that it is definitely going to get bad. I've said my expectation before on stream, but Zia Spots, I'll just quickly restate it. I think what we're gonna see is a massive campaign to deport undocumented immigrants in numbers that put Obama to shame, but that reach nowhere near the 10, 20 million that different times Trump has said he wants to deport. And I think we're going to see a rollback on LGBTQ rights, most likely back to where they were in the 90s. And I think that a lot of social programs are going to get cut to the bone or perhaps axed entirely. A lot of them privatized. It's going to be really bad. It's going to be a looting of our institutions. It's going to be a looting of our programs. But I think that there is a chance that it is not going to be the worst case scenario of like trans people being rounded up into the concentration camps, gas chambers being constructed to save. Like, I don't think we're necessarily going to see that, but we are going to see cruelty on a scale we have not seen in our lifetimes in the United States.
Choose a family. Choose a fucking big television. Choose washing machines, cars, compact disc players, and electrical tin openers.
Salmon Moose, thank you for the 10 gifted tier 1 subs. That is incredibly generous of you. And Sake
Please
Tanuki.
tell me you have a beret for French segments for a Riverboat Jacqueline persona.
My partner has a beret. I don't, but I could certainly get one. I go to enough thrift stores and I see enough of them around that I could absolutely get one. That brings us to 7 subs away from our goal of onesies, chat. But thank you so much, Sake Tanuki, and thank you so goddamn much, Salmon Moose, with the 10 gifted tier 1 subs. Based gifters, indeed. Making the show possible, making my education efforts more real by the day. Rivière Battue, Jacqueline. Paul S., thank you for the $10 super chat.
I'm heading out to a meetup for a new mutual aid group that I'm getting involved in. Thanks, Jack, for keeping the hope alive and an eye on making the future better.
You know, I'm trying my best, Paul S. And good luck. Let us know how your mutual aid meetup goes and how, what, if you can, what y'all are doing to try and make things better. But yeah, that's wonderful. I want more of you to get involved in these community efforts, largely because, well, they're gonna be, the community is what's gonna keep you safe when the shit hits the fan, guys. It's gonna be what is the last bulwark before, the state gets you. If the state truly becomes as vicious as it could potentially be. Anyway.
We also have to help them. It's too much to expect that other people reflect if reflection isn't happening.
Yeah, I think Electric Radimus has the right idea here. We're not guaranteed to see things get that bad, but it's foolishness to think that they can't. And honestly, how bad things are gonna get necessitates the amount of organizing and the amount of seriousness that we should take the coming times. Plus, the more serious we take this, the more we organize, the more we come together, the easier it will be if we, the second the sun begins to rise. The easier it will be for us to come forward and take the reins of our society when the night is done. So that's another reason to start doing this organizing. It is the pathway we have to power. In bad times, that power is resistance, and in good times, that power is, winning the class war.
At a higher level or in a broader way. What do I mean by that? I mean two things. The first, as I said when I talked about the last lesson, is that we need an investigation, many investigations, with historians, with digital forensics experts, with people with all kinds of expertise. We need a number of investigations of what happened on January 6th. Not least so, policemen, policewomen, members of the armed forces can read those papers, think for themselves about how it got to that point, how they would have behaved, how they should have behaved. Because
I like that. I like that, Salmon Moose. Something we say in API design is prepare for anything, but only output the best. True. I like that. Let's put our best foot forward.
whatever we say about January 6th, something was desperately wrong when an armed mob calling for murder breaks through the doors and windows of our Congress. Something was wrong, which has to do not just with the armed mob, but which has to do with the police and the armed forces and with us. And so my point is, as we ask these people to be reflective, we also have to give them something upon which they can reflect, which would mean...
Non-binary, what the fuck are you posting in chat? You okay?
Importantly, reports about the 6th of January. The second thing about reflection has to do with the press. And this might be even more unexpected, but it's really, really important. One of the worst things which has happened to us as a country is that we've lost our local press. We've lost our local newspapers. Most of the country is a news desert. And that means that people don't know if
Oh, it's a
local
movie?
politicians
Gotcha.
are corrupt or how they're corrupt. It means that people don't know if their water is polluted or not. And it means that people don't know, unless they have personal knowledge, they don't know if particular members of the police are behaving badly. That's the kind of thing that reporters know about before the rest of us know about. So what I'm trying to say is that among the hundreds of important functions that a local press used to serve, one of them was keeping track of the police, or to put it in a more neutral way, helping the police keep track of themselves. So
this is a really good point. And a lot of this continues to come down to we need to support local journalists. We need to support journalists that actually have their finger on the beat. You know, our Aaron Reeds, for example, you know, Aaron in the morning, who just made the jump over to Blue Sky, by the way. So if you want to keep up with what she's been writing about, head on over to Blue Sky and follow her. And while you're there, you can also follow me. Just throwing that out there.
in order for us to be reflective about a nation in general in particular,
Hey, Koopa Shell.
we have to have ways to reflect. We have to have investigations. Investigations can be national investigations, but they can also be local, everyday investigations carried out by reporters. As a country, we have to be able to be more reflective. And the police and George Floyd and the murder of African Americans, those are things which can be understood in terms of racism. They can be understood in terms of particular police officers, and that's all valid. But they can also be understood as a failure of reflection, a failure of communication, as we lose the ability to see our own localities, as we lose the possibility of following through the eyes of reporters what happens in this precinct, what happens in this neighborhood.
And honestly, to this end, if you have an interest in documentation, if you have an interest in reporting, even informally, on things, please act on it. You know, please get out there and participate, observe protests, you know, observe the police, get out there, report, work with your local newspaper even to learn the ropes if you feel unsure. But this is a really important core function of society, because society relies on knowing about the workings of society, which is what reporters, you know, talk about.
When we lose that, then those kinds of events are also more likely. So it's like everything else. We can ask people to do the right thing, to be reflective, but we also have to make it easier for them to do the right thing. We have to give them ways to reflect. This was lesson 7, be reflective if you must be armed. Thank you.
Damn, Salmon Moose.
The environmentalist in me feels it's appropriate to freeze the manatee. Free the manatee. Fill the manatee with shimp and yeehaw.
Shimp and the Yeehaw. Salmon Moose, thank you for the 10 gifted tier 1 subs. And that does, in fact, put us over the line for girlfriends in onesies. So later tonight, my partner and I will be wearing our onesies and cozily playing Dream Daddy for your enjoyment. And I think it's going to be really fun. I think we're going to have a good time. I'm excited. We started romancing the hunky dad at the coffee bar, but will we wind up with him? We did have that fling with the random guy at the bar. Who knows? Maybe we'll return to him. Anything could happen in this Dream Daddy run. Dream Daddy. Is that how you spell onesie? It is indeed, Neptunian Raven. Also, hello. Who's gonna love you, baby? The one night stand to the shitty dad? Yeah. All right. I think we might have time for a few more of these. Let's see if we can get through half of On Tyranny together. I think we can do it. Let's jump into the next one, huh? And remember, hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit all the buttons, and consider supporting stream as well. Thank you so goddamn much, Salmon Moose. You are amazing. Would you incorporate dice rolls into your game? No, I think it's more fun for my partner to make the decisions. I like that. Maybe in the future I'll consider like a smart die version of Baldur's Gate where I make decisions based on a die roll. That could be fun. It is fun to watch Clarice. I like her a lot. She's my favorite. I looked at her the other day and like she was like framed. I just like looked over and like my heart like skipped some beats. Like she looked so pretty and her smile was so beautiful and I love her with all my little heart. Anyway, I'm excited to play video games with her. I like playing. We don't get to play video games very often because most of the time I'm streaming. So thank you, chat. Thanks for getting us over the line. Gay. Now I feel lonely. Why? You can play video games with us. It'll be great. All right. Diving back in. Also, this is a cute little guitar jangles. I like it.
Hello, I'm Timothy Snyder. I'm doing a series of videos where I return to the lessons of On Tyranny. We're probably going to call it Timothy Snyder Speaks About On Tyranny. It's been several years since the book came out. It's been almost half a decade since I came up with the lessons. A lot has happened in between. An entire term of Mr. Trump, for example. A lot has happened to us in between. A good thing that's happened to the book is that it's been updated. The text has been updated a bit by me.
I'm sure you've been asked this before, but what are your takes on gun ownership? And what's the best way for cis dude allies to help support trans people during the next few years?
Well, real quick, my takes on gun ownership are that I think guns are neat, but I don't necessarily think that like they're so neat that they outweigh the lives of like school children. And I think that there are a lot of things we could do in society to curtail gun ownership or make more sure that gun owners are responsible, et cetera, in order to preclude mass shootings. But ultimately, if I had my way, I would love a world where people could just melt down their guns into like creative statues or whatever. That being said, I don't know that we have a solution to that right now. I do think a federal gun buyback program would be in order to get more guns out of circulation that people just don't want. And I think also that, you know, in the coming time we're going into, guns being so prolific and dangerous, I do think that we have on the left a need to arm ourselves in order to protect ourselves, especially marginalized folks, from brown shirt violence, i.e. paramilitary violence that may or may not explode in the near future. I think that's a big thing, actually, that we should be concerned about. And that being said, not everyone is suited for gun ownership. Obviously, there are a lot of people who have mental health crises that mean that they probably shouldn't own a gun. Anyway, that's a very rambling answer. Hopefully that clarifies some things. Generally, I'm very in favor of common sense gun control reform that the majority of Americans are in favor of, and I would also like a federal gun buyback program to just get guns off the streets. And best way for cis dude allies to help support trans people during the next few years. Well, one, you can be like a safe person who is responsibly strapped and is willing to step in to help and defend trans people. That's one thing. Recently in my city, 2 trans women were assaulted in public. And the people are standing around just laughed. You know, don't be one of those people. Be someone who's willing to intervene. And additionally, I do think that, you know, speaking up to your other cis dude friends in favor of and in defense of trans people does a world of good. If you are a cis dude, standing up for trans people in your friend groups, in your professional groups, in your various settings, that does so much good because it shows other cis men that they can, in fact, just be chill with trans people. Setting that example is really, really important. See you, Metal Kitty Mom. Fuck me, are you serious? Yeah. I think a lot of men, like cis men, forget that they have their opinion and how they talk conveys a whole world of things to their peers. And absolutely helps when you speak up if your friends are making a transphobic joke or if your colleague makes a transphobic joke and pushing back on that. Personally didn't like getting told when people here in Arizona were watching ballot boxes in the 2022 election that I should have to get a gun to feel safe. Yeah, and that's the thing. We're in bad times. And I don't, frankly, even with a gun, I don't think I would feel safe. That being said, there are some people, and I think knowing where you can go that may have guns that would keep you, / people trained to use them that would keep you safe, I think that is a really important thing for marginalized folks right now. I know I have that place to go if things get really bad. I know I have a safe place that I can retreat to in my local area where I'm going to be protected by someone who knows how to use a firearm. So that's I don't think that's good. I don't think I should have to do that. But unfortunately, we live in times where like that's what a lot of people need. Because things are right now things are not as bad as they can be. And they're going to get a lot worse. And I don't know if it's going to get worst case scenario. I hope it doesn't. But even if it doesn't get worst case scenario, it's going to get worse, and there's going to be more violence that trickles down because people in positions of authority are giving Republican nut jobs permission to go hunting, for lack of a better word.
I've definitely been standing up more since hearing the woman I had a crush on for 20 years claim that her PhD was on how NB was a subset of narcissistic per disso.
Oh, wow. Sake Tanuki, first of all, thank you for the 5 tier 1 subs. I'm sorry to hear that your crush of 20 years wrote her PhD thesis on how non-binary people are narcissistic. That sucks. That is a real oof scenario. I'm sorry to hear that. Nancy Mace doesn't want anything except attention, job security, and more money. That's what Nancy Mace wants. And hating trans people publicly is the way for her to get those things. I was flabbergasted both at her having it and her advisor okaying it. Yeah, it seems like a complete failure on like all levels of higher learning. That's crazy. John Bainbridge, I don't think you have to own a gun to learn how to shoot. A lot of ranges will rent you a gun for the shooting range. Anyway, moving on. Hopefully that answered your question. Who asked that question? True King Menelaus. Hopefully that answered your question. Makes me think the university is a bill mill. I mean, honestly, yeah. I'm surprised that passed her. Yeah, I'm surprised that passed muster. Hey, Gayfesh.
But more importantly, the book is now going to appear framed by the wonderful illustrations of Nora Krug. The book's going to appear in October of 2021. I'm talking to you in the summer. So I'm using this as an occasion to work.
Yeah, a lot of gun ranges offer free lessons, and they also sell guns, and they also rent guns because, you know, it's convenient to have it all in the same place.
Through the lessons again. I've been closer to this text now than I have been for a little while, and what I'm going to do is offer a few reflections on it, on each lesson, having read the.
Oh man, yeah, living in the sticks as a cis guy, like you standing up for trans people among your like social peers and family, friends, etc. I think it would do a world of good into maybe helping your community become more accepting of trans people. You know, and making more communities accepting of trans people is what ultimately will make trans people safe everywhere.
The lesson. So today we're on lesson 8 of On Tyranny, which is Stand Out.
Hey, Shiny Lock.
Stand out. Someone has to. It is easy to follow along. It can feel strange to do or say something different. But without that unease, there is no freedom. Remember Rosa Parks. The moment you set an example, the spell of the status quo is broken, and others will follow.
Now, before he gets into the rest of this here, I think it's important to note that the act of standing out is absolutely empowered if there is an organization behind it. Much like how Rosa Parks stood out not by accident, but by design. Rosa Parks picked her shot. You know, she took her time with her organization backing her and deliberately did that. It wasn't just a spur of the moment, impetuous decision. It was one done knowing what would happen and having a plan for supporting her and those who would follow her. Like, it was done deliberately. And so what we're trying to do here, our community, we're trying to build a kind of organization and community that can, in fact, provide support for people who want to take these intentional stand up, stand out positions going forward, because that is going to be, again, one of the axes of resistance that you can personally, any one of you can personally participate in.
So along with lesson number 1, Don't Obey in Advance, this one is special to me because it's the one which is most individual.
Hey, the guy.
It's closest to the classic idea of freedom, where you're recognizing the world around you and you're doing something else. You're not obeying in lesson 1. Here in lesson 8, you're standing out. Another thing these lessons have in common is the feeling of discomfort. And the feeling of discomfort is good. I'm not saying pain is good or suffering is good, but I'm saying that feeling where you suddenly realize that not everyone is with you and you're not with everyone. That moment when you recognize that you've stood out a bit, that feeling is very, very important. It's
also, one of the things that a lot of this advice has kind of centered around is the idea of, through your actions, granting permission for others to similarly resist, right? And what I would say is that a good parallel for this is, people who intentionally got themselves arrested during the civil rights movement. As that was spinning up, as people started doing these lunch counter sit-ins, as people started, going out to protests, one of the things that happened early on was kind of this realization that being arrested was good. Being arrested in order to protest as an act of civil disobedience was good. It was powerful. It was a position of power because ultimately what you are doing is willfully breaking the law in order to make a point, to point out the injustice. It brings attention, it brings eyes, but more than that, it also signals to everyone in your group that it is okay to push against the system in this way. So one of the things that happened with the civil rights movement was there was some trepidation of towards getting arrested, but when people started realizing, hey, we can actually use this, they're not arresting all of us, they're just arresting some of us. But they don't have the means to actually arrest all of us. And so they started walking down to the police stations together to get arrested en masse. People started seeing in their community the badge of being arrested as one of honor. And, people started, arguing, no, you need to arrest me. I was at that protest. And if I'm not arrested, people will start talking, like it started being like this thing where people were inspired and had like a culture set for them around resistance and civil disobedience in ways that the state was unable to maintain. John Lewis wrote in the March trilogy that they would deliberately get arrested in numbers that would overwhelm the local jails. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And Bisadu writes, Jack, what you're talking about right now is kind of how I feel about the Sarah McBride situation. Her saying she's not going to fight, I assume in an attempt to not get turned into a "it's ma'am" meme, is her begging cis folks surrounding her to stand up for her. Am I completely off base? I don't like her for other reasons. But as a fellow trans woman, I don't know if I'd be able to be the Rosa Parks trying to use the women's bathroom, maybe because I don't have a support system like you're describing. And yeah, that could very well be. I do think it would send a very powerful message if she just said, I'm here to do the work that Delawareans, voted for me to do, and they voted for me knowing who I am and knowing that I'm going to use the women's restroom, and anyone who stands in my way stands in the way of all of my constituents. And I think that would send a very strong message. But I also understand not everyone is ready to play that role. And so it's hard for me to condemn her too much, but I don't like how she's handled a lot of this, and I wish she would handle it in a different way. But I also understand moving away from that calling. And hope I'm willing to admit I could be wrong. Maybe her play is the right one, but I think a lot of trans people would have liked to see more fight. There's a role in the Dems not standing behind her. Yeah, exactly. There's also like culpability among the Democratic Party for not immediately standing behind her. Yeah. In what way, though? I feel like people have been so hard on her. Frankly, I think she should use the women's restroom regardless of what laws Nancy Mace tries to pass. I think you use the restroom and you plant your flag in the sand. I think you put the rubber where it meets the road. And if they want to arrest you on that, then you make it very clear that what they are doing is silencing the people of Delaware and their will in order to pursue this culture war nonsense. She should take a friend. She should absolutely do it with other people. I'm not saying she should just, like, alone go do it, but much like Rosa Parks, she had people supporting her. She was not by herself. And I think in a similar way, if she wanted to, she could go a very different direction, get people to go around with her, and be the person who gets arrested first for this. Set the message that it's okay to resist in this way. But I also understand people who don't want to make that sacrifice, make that hard choice. I get it. It's scary for a trans woman to face the criminal justice system. And I can't fault anyone who looks at that and is afraid. Because it again, exactly what this guy's talking about here. It is hard to stand out. It is a discomfort, and especially when it comes to trans people, standing out can sometimes mean death, can mean torture. And I don't fault anyone who isn't necessarily willing to take that step yet. But it would have meant a lot to a lot of trans people struggling in their day-to-day lives who are following this story very carefully.
Uncomfortable because we're social creatures. We're creatures
Hey,
who are very
Brian.
good.
Haven't
at
seen you in a hot
adapting.
minute.
And that's appropriate a lot of the time. If you're playing bridge, or you're going bowling, or if you're walking into a party where you only know a few people, it's important that you adapt to the rules, to the situation, to other people's expectations. But then part of being a political person, or even having a polity worthy of the name, is recognizing the moments that aren't just social moments, recognizing the moments where following the rules.
I mean, if Marjorie Taylor Greene wanted to try and, like, fist fight in the restroom, I don't think that ends well for Marjorie Taylor Greene, like, politically, or anyone else who tries to fist fight a woman for using the bathroom. They could certainly vote to, like, censure her or something. They could certainly take revenge in 1,000 ways, but she would definitely get arrested. I don't know exactly, like, maybe a misdemeanor, but honestly, I think disobeying that rule and regulation is good and just.
Flowing into the expectations, doing what people expect of you.
Hey,
That
Nina,
that's
thank you
just
so
not
much for the
enough.
raid.
It's the wrong thing. That's a little uncomfortable. That's what I mean by standing out. But it's good. It's good to stand out. It's good to have that feeling, because when you have that feeling, you're the one then who's reshuffling the deck.
Yeah, but honestly, the more chaos we sow among Republicans, the better. Let them have that chaotic discussion.
You're the one who's changing the status quo. You're the one who's reordering the symbols. If you stand out just a little bit, you've made the whole future go off in a different direction. And that can't be done without standing out. In the little chapter that follows this lesson, I give a couple kinds of examples of standing out. At one end, we have a young woman called Teresa Prekarova, who rescued a family from the Warsaw Ghetto during the Holocaust. The interesting thing about Teresa was that she didn't change when everyone around her changed. And that's one way to stand out, to
Thanks,
have a set of values and to hold close to them, even when other people are adapting, and even when other people think that it's a little bit strange, a little bit weird, that you're holding on to your values, right? That you have integrity. At the other end of the spectrum, there was another kind of standing out in this chapter, which was Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill in 1940, the decision to keep Great Britain in the war, and the work by an individual of recognizing the world historical moment, frankly, and standing out by doing what his country didn't necessarily want him to do. The interesting thing about that, of course, is that because Churchill chose to keep fighting, because the British with him chose to keep fighting, everything about British history after that point, and the way that the English and the British understand themselves, is different. if Churchill had been like other politicians and said, let's make a reasonable compromise, everything after that would have been different. But regardless of the scale, you can see these two important parts of standing out, that you're standing out on the basis of things that you believe, and you're also standing on the basis of recognizing a situation as in some way being unacceptable. For Teresa Prekharova, the situation was local. It was the Warsaw Ghetto. For Churchill, it was global. It was Nazi power as such. But in both cases, you have this sense of what is right up against the circumstances. I can't now give a list of...
Yeah, because standing out does involve having a sense of self that is not easily malleable. I think this is a good point for him to make.
All the Americans who have stood out in the last 5 years, and that's for a very good reason. There have been a lot of them, and most of the people who stand out are more like Teresa Prekharova than they're like Winston Churchill. Most of the people who stand out are not going to be remembered by history. They're going to change history, but they're not going to be remembered by history. That things did not go as badly as they might have gone in the last 4 or 5 years in the US has to do with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people who chose to stand out in small ways or in larger ways. I will mention a couple names though. I'll bring together a couple groups of people. There were the people who kept doing what they should have been doing in their professional roles, going back to the lesson on professional ethics. People like Alex.
Oh yeah, Knighted Tomb. It getting permission is not solely a positive thing. It can be used for good or evil. You know, having permission to do evil is also something that works on the population. So what we need to do is win that messaging war. We need to win by building solidarity with each other, with as many people as possible. Because it is not a one-way street.
Alexander Vindman or Fiona Hill or the other people who testified in that hearing. There are people who recognize that if a president of the United States is asking a foreign country to help him in an election, then that's not an acceptable situation, and that we must have some value within us which allows us to stand out, even if we pay a price, right? As Mr. Vindman certainly did. There were people who stood out because they found unusual ways to deal with basic problems. So many, I can't mention them in a short video, but I'll mention a couple. On one side, someone like Stacey Abrams, who recognized that the issue of voting is so fundamental to the future and the moral character, the moral shape of our country, that it was worth devoting oneself to. She's not the only one who did this. I mentioned her as one name of many who stood out, and I'm going to return to why voting and standing out go together. Or in a completely different part of the world, someone like Tim Wu, who recognized that bigger is worse, that the existence of huge monopolies in our economy is bad for everyone. It's not a popular position, it's not an obvious position, but it's a true position. And it's a position he took very clearly and that he's now making policy around. There are people who stood out because at extraordinary moments of difficulty, they recognized they had to do something extraordinary in response. Like, for example, the Capitol Police officer, Eugene Goodman.
Who probably saved lives on January 6th.
Thanks to whom, I think it's fair to say, our political order has a much better chance of surviving. What Mr. Goodman did was truly extraordinary in recognizing an imminent threat, not just to important people in an important place, but to our whole order, and in acting creatively and humbly. And then, of course, again, from another position entirely in our social and political order, someone like Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney is the first person to vote for the impeachment of a president in his own political party in the history of the United States.
Which, again, lowest possible bar, but honestly, yeah, that made Mitt Romney like persona non grata in the Republican Party. He's basically dead in the water politically for the rest of his life because of that decision.
One does not have to agree with Senator Romney on all of his positions to note that this is what he will be remembered for. If there is a democracy in the United States in 50 years and if people are still writing its history, he will be remembered for that, because that will be the thing that he did, that moment when he chose to be different, that ended up making a difference.
Oh yeah, worth noting, Winston Churchill did genocide. He's a bad dude. He's evil in a lot of ways.
I said, there are too many people. I can't list them. These are meant to be short videos. But the interesting thing about standing out, as I think has been suggested even by this very, very, very short list, is how when you stand out, it means that you're showing yourself as an individual, right? Standing out in a broad way. It's not just about holding back things that are bad. It's also about asserting unpredictability, individuality, which are essential elements of what we think about as freedom. I said I would return to voting, and I will. Rosa Parks, I mentioned in the original lesson. There's something important here that connects to the issue of voting. It's easy in general in our country for white people to vote, or easier.
Yep.
Right? If you're a white person listening to this, you don't wait online probably to vote.
It's true.
And if you're a black person listening to this, you probably do wait for a very long time to vote. I realize individual experiences will be different, but on average, that's the way things are. And the way that our voting is being taken away from us, as usual in American history, is by starting with the black people. And so what I'm saying here is that
ID laws.
It's not enough for there to be people like African Americans like Stacey Abrams who stand out and say this is a problem not just for African Americans, but for the whole system. There also have to be white people. And when I say white people standing out here, I mean in a specific way, because it's not our problem yet, right? That's how you can react to it. You can say it's not our problem, right? Maybe it's difficult for them, but all in all, things are okay because it doesn't touch upon us. But you have to stand out, if only a little bit, just a little bit, from all those other white people who don't really care about voting as long as they get to vote. You have to stand out, if only just a little bit. That's the funny thing, right? In order for us to have a citizenry, in order for us to all be together, in order for us all to have the same rights, some of us have to pop up a little bit every now and again and go against the current, go against the grain, go against the people who are immediately around us, if only a little bit. We have to do that. In the years to come, I think voting rights is going to be a place where people are going to have to stand out. This was lesson 8. Thank you very much.
And that is basically all the time I have today.